Dear oh dear, they just don't get it, do they? By they I mean the modern day Australian Labor Party. Sure, over the past few days we've had the National Secretary Carl Bitar being cathartic. Last week it was Greg Combey's turn. This week Paul Howes joins the "We're lost, help me please" crew with the release of his book Confessions of a Faceless Man. Meanwhile, newspaper headlines echo their sentiments about a lost ALP. Even today's Daily Telegraph editorial screams, "Labor, party with no future." Well, hang on there. Whose fault is all this, and what are the core reasons for it? This is what the likes of Howes, Combey and Bitar are not addressing. Sure, it's fine to bleat about the ALP's internal problems, the internecine problems in the party, the campaign, the leaks, and all the argy-bargy of day-to-day political life. It is also fair to say the Greens have become the left wing of the ALP and stand a real chance of eventually eating their creator. And once again, the ALP has no one to blame for this but itself. But all of this is well and fine. The general public is sufficiently aware of the general run-of-the-mill standard of our current crop of politicians. That just doesn't go for the ALP, it goes for the Liberal Party as well. They no longer fall for the spin, they are smart enough to see through it, and that really is where the modern-day ALP has fallen down badly, through the giddiness created by its own spin. People expect politicians to present themselves as omnipotent and on top of everything, even though they don't believe it for 1 millisecond. Howes, Combey and Bitar have bounced off walls this week blaming this sector of the party and the party's direction and what the party stands for. But they have forgotten the real players. Us, the voters, you and I. That is the ALP's problem. And I'll tell you why. Firstly, the ALP cannot cope with criticism. Any criticism directed at it from a person outside of the inner sanctum is treated with derision or disdain. So all the crap Paul Howes went on with on agenda about debate is rot, clearly. His meaning of debate is an orchestrated debate within the party. It's not for you and I to participate in, Mr. and Mrs. Public. We can't discuss it, because if we do, we're seen as outsiders and not entitled to a view. Secondly, the modern ALP is, in general, full of people who have a major problem. Their word's no good. Even private undertakings given to you by an ALP honcho these days is not worth diddly squat. There was a period of time, whether you were a rusted-on Labor supporter, a Liberal ideologue, if an ALP bloke gave you his word, it was his bond. That no longer applies in the modern ALP. That particularly appertained to your private dealings with them. This again no longer applies. Their word is simply no good, so when a party reaches a stage where they even try and spin you privately, the machine's broken. Their inability to keep their word publicly or privately is the rock the party will perish on. It was the party of the worker, the average bloke, the aspirational, the socially minded. That's all changed. And well may Howes, Combey and Bitar talk about the culture in the party, but they don't talk about who created it. Sure, they apportion blame in a general sense, except in the case of Kevin Rudd, where it's open season. But it is always someone else's fault generally, and that is how they talk to you privately as well. The cathartic mood is fine for ALP members, but what about the people who do not breathe the rarefied air of the inner sanctum and how the ALP relates to them? There is an obvious reason for this sudden level of culpability within the ALP, and of course the hemorrhaging of votes to the Greens plays no small role. But there are other factors at play as well, all of which the party boffins will deny, and for a party that now continually lives in denial, that should come as no surprise. First, the fall of the government's fortunes in the polls is a significant factor. Secondly, the blind ambition of Bill Shorten is playing no small role in the level of uneasiness some feel. Would the independents cop a second Prime Minister axed in her first term? Probably not on your Nelly. Thirdly, the presence of Kevin Rudd still in there after having had the best and most concerted dump job done on him by his two-faced colleagues that we've ever seen. In many ways, Rudd has himself inadvertently become part of Gillard's insurance policy, the other part, of course, being the independents. The movers and shakers are doing their level best to continually bucket him because they wanted him totally discredited before the bucket-tipping pendulum turns. And they are standing underneath the bucket. And they know sufficiently well that the chances of that are not incomprehensible while ever Rudd is a senior cabinet minister. I have no doubt any move by Shorten will see the government fall. Not that this will worry Shorten too much. After all, many Labor insiders will tell you that he did go to Mark Arbib when he was the New South Wales ALP State Secretary in the company of Mr Ludwig and asked that the New South Wales ALP maintain its support behind Kim Beazley as leader in the lead up to the 2007 election, with the deal being Shorten would assume the leadership if Beazley lost. So he was a supposed ALP-minded man trying to broker a deal that would have seen his party potentially in opposition for a further term, just to serve his own ends. Gee, that's great. In their usual upfront and honest form, the ALP will say rubbish, which again leads me back to their words simply being no good. Rudd is fully aware who was instrumental in his demise, and the orchestrators hoped his demise would lead to his political interment. This did not happen, and call me old-fashioned, but Rudd hardly seems to be the forgive and forget type. So they have no option but to continually bucket him. But Rudd's leadership career may well be brown bread. The party has just now got to work out how Julia Gillard becomes Shorten inbred. There is little doubt that Gillard is suffering badly at the hands of the hung Parliament, and this suffering will only be exacerbated when the Greens get control of the Senate next year. The government will be under siege, and that to Shorten, and add to that the Shorten threat, and Gillard is probably in suspended animation. While the Greens are being portrayed as an anathema to the ALP is responsible for their rise and rise, firstly by being unable to keep their word, and secondly by having political sex with the Greens and lacking the gumption to leave them preferentially marooned. Whether you agree with the Greens' policies or not, they are perceived by metropolitan Australians mainly as a party that stands for something, which, justifiably so, cannot be said about the modern-day ALP. For a swinging voter like myself, the appeal of the current ALP machine ranks slightly below Zanu Payev and just slightly above Hamid Karzai's regime in Afghanistan or the military junta in Burma in the trustworthy stakes. And that is sad for the many people who have supported the ALP blindly, financially, morally, and have worked hard to see this party get to the stage where it was a major force in Australian politics. The choice for the ALP is now stark. Grow up, start honouring your word, and stand for something again, or face political obliteration, which will only be accelerated by self-interest, blind ambition, and failure to relate to people outside of your tent. All the books, all the spin, all the public bleeding all over the carpet, and all the public pleading to the people inside the tent won't help. It's the people outside of the tent the ALP has to convince. And there are more of us than there are those inside the tent. So stop pleading inwardly and start turning your focus outwardly, because then, and only then, will the ALP have the opportunity to recover the enormous ground it has lost.